Have you ever had your own rival, ghouls and gals? Have you ever known someone that you despise so much you would do almost anything to ensure their demise? No? Well then it's very unlikely you'd make it very long in the world of Warhammer. In the old world, rivalries are like Skaven. They're everywhere, even if at first they aren't easy to spot. We're not talking the ancient hatred shared between the Empire and Chaos or Greenskins and the Dwarves, mind you. We're talking about the rivalries that exist within factions. Specifically, one catfight to top them all between the Hag Queen of Harganeth, Crone Hellebron, and the Hag Sorceress Morathi. In another world, these two could have been fast friends. They both loved unaliving people, they both have the same fashion taste, and are elves of near unmatched beauty. Actually, that last part might just be one of the reasons why they never got on, really. Morathi was always one to grow jealous whenever anyone challenged her position as the belle of the murder ball. While we're probably all familiar with the tale of Morathi and Hellebron's hatred for one another, this wasn't a sudden occurrence that GW decided to put in to give the Dark Elves a bit of spice. No, the rivalry between these two began millennia ago, when the world was still young and elves still populated the old world. In the elven city of Athel Toralien, a child was born, the daughter of Lord Elandrian, a confidant of the future Witch King Malekith. Hellebron was positioned from an early age to become a high-ranking elf in the old world thanks to her father and his position in court. In her youth, she found the courage to approach Morathi, who was then still a pure and noble part of high elf society. Hellebron asked to be part of the sorceress's entourage. Morathi took one look at the girl and dismissed her, denying her request since she had no magic nor any artistic skills to speak of. This rejection, this utter dismissal burned a fire deep in Hellebron's stomach. She would not be able to act upon this feeling for some time, but for the first time in her life she held hatred like no other. Without Morathi to follow, Hellebron found herself a new master, one by the name of Cain. As the cults of pleasure, excess, and other worshippers of the Sithrai pantheon began popping up all over Athel Toralien, Hellebron found the cult of Cain, with its focus on battle and bloodletting, to be the most appealing. She also found a good deal of copium in worshipping this god, as she told herself and others that it was okay to worship a guy called the Lord of Murder because the elves' greatest champion, Phoenix King Anarion, had wielded the Sword of Cain. Hellebron quickly rose through the ranks of the cult of Cain, even sacrificing her mentor to him. She came up with new ways for the devout to win their god's favour, such as fighting without armour and offering up enemies as ritualistic sacrifices. As it turns out, these proved to be popular pastimes for elves, so popular in fact, that the cults of excess, luxury, and Morathi's own cult of pleasure took a hit in membership. If Morathi had no cause to take heed of this young ambitious hag, now she did. However, the cult of Cain's dominance was brought to a halt when it was outlawed alongside the other cults of the Sithrai pantheon. Hellebron was imprisoned but did not renounce her god. In time, her cult was reinstated, and she was tasked with persecuting the other cults once more. When the Great Elven Civil War took place, Hellebron stood at Malekith's side. A fighter with no competition among her fellow hags, Hellebron was a walking death during the war. Her armies devastated Cathike, and she even seemed to have killed Aletha Nar at one point, but sadly she could not win Malekith the throne. Once he had been defeated, she, along with the other Dark Elves, left Ulthuan and made new homes in the cold north. For Hellebron, she found herself some cosy new digs in Harganeth, where she became its Hag Queen. While Hellebron may have earned herself Malekith's favour by fighting at his side, he was no longer around, and Morathi used her son's absence to dig her heel into Hellebron. As a thanks for persecuting her cult, Morathi banned Hellebron from rejuvenating herself in the cauldrons of blood. While the Hag Sorceress remained youthful and beautiful for centuries to come, over the course of Warhammer Fantasy's lore and history, Hellebron's youth has deteriorated. Once, she was perhaps the most beautiful of all the elves, at least by Malekith's own opinion, and yet now, for the most of the year, she covers herself in a cloak and cowl, only allowing her most trusted advisors to see her true, withered form. Hellebron can appear somewhat youthful once more during a Death Night, a ritual where Hellebron's armies purge nearby lands and use the blood of the slain as a makeshift blood cauldron, but it's nowhere near as effective as Morathi's methods. It at least allows her to look fairly decent for a little while, but it's not a permanent solution. There are a few reasons as to why Morathi may have barred Hellebron from using the blood cauldrons, but the most likely explanation is jealousy in some form or another. As we know, Malekith believed Hellebron to be incredibly beautiful in her youth. To prevent her from challenging Morathi as the lovely lady by Malekith's side, it's likely the Hag Sorceress made sure Hellebron would not seduce her son in any way. This also means in the eyes of her people, Morathi remains the most beautiful, and it looks like a pretty good advert for the Cult of Pleasure, don't you think? Don't join the murder cult, guys. They might have cool swords, but they get gross and old in time. Yuck! Once denied the Blood Cauldron, Hellebron was furious, mostly because she knew, given the chance, she'd have done the exact same thing to Morathi. She needed vengeance. She needed something that would allow her to challenge Morathi even with her position within Dark Elf society. For years she stewed, trying to come up with the perfect way to bring Malekith's goth mommy down. Then she had it. Chaos. While the Dark Elves are certainly on the bad side of the spectrum, they don't want total destruction like the forces of Chaos do. Hellebron particularly hates Chaos as it can often infiltrate the cults of Dark Elf society. Luckily for Hellebron, she didn't need to do much digging to find that there are ties between the Cult of Pleasure, Morathi, and Slaanesh. However, even as Hellebron knows that there are ties between Morathi and Chaos, to act against her openly would lead to a conflict she likely would not win, as even though Hellebron is an unmatched witch elf, capable of wounding with a whisper and killing with the lightest touch, Morathi would be able to summon Malekith to her side, and it is very unlikely that Hellebron matches the might of Naggarond. Sadly, the time we actually see Hellebron and Morathi clash properly is the non-canon event Storm of Chaos. In this event, which was meant to be Games Workshop's original version of the End Times, Morathi allied herself with the Hung Chaos tribe and made the Cult of Pleasure anew. With a massive army at her back and her cult emboldened by Slaanesh, it was a powerful force, one that could overtake Dark Elf society given the chance. Hellebron was having none of this, and immediately set out to put a stop to the Cult of Pleasure's rise. After forcing Morathi north, the two old rivals awaited a final confrontation that was sure to be bloody. With Malekith wounded at the time, it's likely that whoever came out on top would have decided the future for the Dark Elves. Unfortunately, we don't see that outcome. Instead, Hellebron and Morathi continue mostly just shaking their fists at each other from their respective towers for most of Warhammer's lore. As usual, this all wraps up around the end times. But rather than seeing who would come out on top in the Battle of the Hags, Hellebron is mostly sidelined in the story of the end of the world. When the Chaos Hordes of Khorne come marching from the north and slaughter their way towards Naggarond, it is only Hag and Neth that can keep them at bay. Hellebron and her forces match the brutality of Khorne's endless tides, but they cannot hold out forever. Despite asking for help again and again, Hellebron's pleas fall on deaf ears, and Malekith just ditches her so that he can make one last play for the throne of Ulthuan. Now, it's likely that Morathi ensured Hellebron wouldn't receive any help from her son, but it basically means she's a non-factor in the final war for the elves. As the High Priestess of the Cult of Cain, Hellebron is arguably the third most important person in Druchii society after Malekith and Morathi, so it sucks that she's basically given no attention in this final section of the lore. Only at the Battle of Middenheim does she return, where she's fighting on the side of the baddies. Again, weird considering her hatred for Chaos, but she was turned by Khorne's corruption. Eventually, she's brought low by Alariel the Everqueen, but not before she finally gets some clarity and weeps for all the people she's unalived. It's not exactly a great end for the Hag Queen, and considering Morathi gets to live on in Age of Sigmar, even if it is as a snake woman, I guess we know who won out in the end. It's safe to say I much prefer the subplot for Storm of Chaos for Hellebron, where she's trying to root out Chaos rather than succumbing to it because she didn't want to leave her home and couldn't get any help from the other Dark Elves. It just makes her out to be a B-list player, when considering she leads the most popular religion in Dark Elf society, she should have been someone of constant concern, and yet, even with martial skills unmatched by any hag, her end is a whimper rather than a scream of glory for Cain. Of course, I would have loved to see one final showdown between Morathi and Hellebron, as it feels like one of those conflicts that's been building for centuries, but never really got a proper payoff. For her war gear, Hellebron wields two magical blades. The Death Sword leaves a red trail in the air when used in combat, and the Cursed Blade deflects almost any enemy attack with ease. She also wears the Amulet of Dark, which gives her resistance to magical damage. But yeah, there's not really a great way to wrap this one up. I wish there was a satisfying epic conclusion to this Battle of the Hags, but there isn't. While yes, Hellebron hated Alariel too, it always felt like her mortal enemy was Morathi. You know, because she made her ugly. Let me know who you think would have won if the two of them had been allowed to come to blows, and who you want me to cover next. Until then, stay ghoulin', ghouls and gals. Love ya.